What is going on, everybody? Welcome in to our next deep dive, now officially halfway through the series, with our number 17 team here, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jags fans, I hope you are over what happened at the end of last year in what was a truly historic collapse to miss out on the playoffs, but I hope you're over it and are ready to talk some football and get optimistic about the Jags here again. I don't know if the 17th ranking is too high or too low. I've seen some mixed comments on that one, but we're here nonetheless. And frankly, I don't know myself where this one's going to go. There are certainly some question marks, but a lot of explosiveness and upside here as well. It is worth noting that the Jags here at 17 kick off a new tier in the rankings. This tier is, to me now, teams that it would be a disappointment if they did not make the playoffs, which I think raises the stakes a little bit, makes this all the more interesting to talk about here today. But before we do get started, if you could please hit that like button, I really appreciate it. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the second half of the series with these videos coming out every 2 or 3 days now as we lead up to the season. And let's get into it. So, taking a look at the Jags offseason, where they got better, where they got worse, with the coaching staff off the top. I'm going to say upgraded with the coaching staff. They do move on from defensive coordinator Mike Caldwell, who did some good stuff for this defense, but there's been a lot of talk about how the players were confused and they lacked a lot of gap discipline, and the end product certainly wasn't as good as it could have been for the Jags defense in his 2-year tenure for the Jags. And they found a good one in Ryan Nielsen, who really was only available because the Falcons felt like they upgraded in getting a really good defensive mind as their head coach in Raheem Morris. And Ryan Nielsen, who was just there for a year, ends up being the odd man out there from Atlanta. But he did a good job with a Falcons defense that really lacked talent. We'll talk more about what his scheme is going to look like. It's going to be a pretty drastic overhaul schematically for the Jags, but I think it's going to be for the best. So we're going to say upgraded with the coaching staff. For the most part, your coordinators and the head coach obviously have stayed the same. Then at quarterback, all they did was bring in Mac Jones as a backup. You're hoping he's not going to play, so we'll go neutral at quarterback. And then at running back, leaving this as neutral, they're mostly just sticking with what they had last year. They did bring in Keelan Robinson out of Texas in the 5th round, more of a scat back and a return guy, but again, leaving that at neutral for running back. Tight end, also neutral, same group other than the addition of Josiah DeGuara from Green Bay, who's going to have to compete for a roster spot. But then the big one at wide receiver, a lot of shakeup here. They let Calvin Ridley go after entertaining the idea of bringing him back. They didn't quite want to match what Tennessee was willing to give him. But even if he had his up and down moments, that's 85% of this team's snaps that were impactful ones that they're going to have to replace. They're also losing their number 2 outside wide receiver in Zay Jones. Missed some time last year, but still played well in 41% of their snaps. And the guys they're going with to replace that are going to be Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr., the first-round rookie out of LSU. It's going to be tough for that group to outplay what they got from Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones, but I think when you factor in that they only got 40% of the season from Zay Jones, that Calvin Ridley was far from perfect last year, there's still a world that Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr., if he's a hit as a rookie, could actually be an upgrade, and obviously long-term, they're hoping that it will be. And then they did make a little swap with their sort of gadget player and return man, Jamal Agnew, out the door, and they replace him with an equally good return man, if not better, in someone that can actually play wide receiver in Devin Duvernay. So I like that move. But again, to be determined on if the Jags will be better this year or not at wide receiver. Offensive line, hard to say anything other than upgraded. They don't lose anybody, and they add veteran center Mitch Morse, a tackle in the 4th round in Javon Foster that I like, and get a full season of Ezra Cleveland, who they traded for and then extended, only played a third of their snaps last year. But then you look at the defense, and they looked at that interior defensive line last year and said, we will not be having that again. They get rid of Fadu Kasi, who was highly paid to be here, really struggled after getting paid in free agency from the Jets. And then they loaded up. They bring in Eric Armstead in free agency to a big deal. That's a big upgrade alone, just going from Armstead or going from Fatukasi to Armstead. But they draft a pair of LSU defensive tackles, Mason Smith and Jordan Jefferson, in the 4th round. And they get Devon Hamilton back healthy, who only played 17% of their snaps dealing with an injury last year after they had just reached an extension on him. He's still a good player, so getting him back healthy is another upgrade to the interior defensive line that is massively upgraded this year for this team. On the edge, however, really staying neutral, just kind of changing hands with the backups, DeJuan Smoot and Kayvon Chason, and they'll be bringing in Travis Gibson and Miles Cole in the 7th round. Not much to see there. Same with linebacker. They like that room. They didn't touch it. No movement there, staying neutral. But then at corner, this is going to be the big question mark from this offseason, really with the exception of how that wide receiver room shakes down. But I do think this is downgraded. They part ways with Darius Williams. They look at him as not really a scheme fit from what they were using him last year versus what Ryan Nielsen wants to do with him. So I understand moving on from him, but that doesn't mean they didn't get great cornerback play from him last season, and they're going to have to find a way to replace that. And their slot corner last year, Trey Herndon, is no longer back, and they didn't do much to replace a big name in Darius Williams, at least a big name for those that follow the sport closely. He's a really good player. But they bring in Ronald Darby, good player when healthy. The former is a big question. And then a 3rd-round rookie in Jerrion Jones, a 5th-round rookie in Deontre Prince. Needless to say, we're going to have some questions to talk about with the secondary later on in the video. So we do say downgraded with the cornerback room. At safety, they do lose Rayshon Jenkins, who played 99% of their snaps last year, but they like the guys they have in that room and had a nice little sneaky pickup of Terrell Edmonds. I'm going to say that's neutral. Not too worried about the Jenkins loss. And then with the special teams, definitely some shakeup there. We already mentioned the swap of Agnew for Duvernay, but they let go of Brandon McManus, who had a really good year last year, but some off-field drama there. And then they draft Cam Little, the kicker out of Arkansas, in the 6th round. It's going to open up a lot of questions about who's kicking the football for them. Overall, I think it's a pretty good offseason. I have my nitpicks. I didn't love their draft after the 1st round. I think they overpaid Gabe Davis a little bit. I wish they would have done more in the secondary. And I think they could have, but there are some good moves in there as well. So I will say they're better for it, even if I think this Trent Baalke-led front office could have done even better, which is, unfortunately a theme for this Jags front office. But before we dive into this roster in depth and break down all these position groups, how they rank and stack up against the rest of the league, let's talk about this coaching staff and how they stack up against the rest of the league and what they're going to look like schematically on both sides of the ball. Starting, of course, with the head coach, Doug Peterson. And look, despite being very wrong in 2022, I was not a fan of this hire, and the Jags were good. They made the playoffs. I had a lot of apologizing to do to Jags fans, and things were looking up with Doug Peterson here. After 2023, where they started 8-3 and finished 1-5. And after watching the film on the Jags, getting ready for this video, for this series, I'm just being honest, I'm kind of back to doubting Doug Peterson. So much so that I actually have him on the hot seat conversation for next year, in that if the Jags don't make the playoffs, I wouldn't be stunned if they fired him. And I don't know if that's a hot take or not, but that's certainly where I'd be approaching this if I were in charge in Jacksonville. And I guess you guys can let me know if that's crazy or not. But, it's not like I think Doug Peterson totally stinks. If we look at my coach rankings, I still have him in the top half of the league, ranked 10th to 15th in pass game coaching with a B grade. And I can still definitely say that he can organize a detailed passing game from that sort of shotgun, spread them out, Andy Reid-inspired offense that he runs. They still do a lot of good stuff in the passing game. So I'm happy to give him credit where he's earned it as a coach. But I definitely have concerns with, A, how they ended the season last year, a brutal collapse, finishing 1-5, basically from the point where I had dubbed the Jags a Super Bowl contender onward. They went on and finished 1-5 and looked horrible. And I do think that's a red flag for a coach because as the season goes on, you have injuries, teams adjust, and you need to look at your roster and adapt and tweak things based on what's working, what's not working, where your strengths and weaknesses are. And I think Doug Peterson really struggled to do that for the Jags last year. But honestly, on a more tangible note, maybe my biggest concern with Doug Peterson is what him and the staff underneath him have shown in the run game, where I have the Jags ranked tied for last with a C- grade for run game coaching. And when getting through the film on the 2023 Jags, there were 3 areas that just drove me crazy watching this team try and run the football. And number one here is I really think they just overcomplicate the run game in general with the types of runs that they call. Runs that many teams would consider to be like a change-up pitch are the Jags' primary pitch, if that makes sense. They over-rely on all these different sorts of runs that, to me, are just getting too cute with complicated, difficult blocking assignments, pullers, or tight ends coming across the formation. They're always trying to steal a gap by inviting guys into the backfield, and then they're either reading the guy or having someone coming cross formation to block the guy. But so often the running back's getting the carry and there's already guys in the backfield, and that's by design. And it leads to this just very boom or bust overall approach to the run game that to me is just a lot less effective than just getting north and south, punching people in the mouth and running the football the way you're supposed to. And this style, without a doubt, hurt them more than it helped them last year, oftentimes putting them behind the chains with dead runs, getting blown up in the backfield, or even failing to convert short yardage situations or failing down at the goal line. It was tough to watch, man. And then my number 2 complaint is much more simple, but equally frustrating in that just stop trying to run outside zone out of shotgun. It's been basically proven at this point, any analytic you look for, or just load up all of the outside zone shotgun runs in the NFL last year. It's busted. It's like a bad play in Madden that never works. And it has to do with the angles of the blocking and the linebackers' pursuit angles and the running back. You could do a whole video explaining why outside zone out of shotgun doesn't work, but it didn't work for the Jags. It doesn't work for anybody, yet they keep running it. And I'm like, why do you keep doing it? This is silly. And then my number 3 thing is much more of a subjective point, but I really just don't think Doug Peterson and his staff have a good understanding of the run game, and as a result, they aren't good at coaching the run game to their players. And it's hard to contextualize this entirely without just watching them play, though their abysmal rushing DVOA numbers over the last 2 years under Doug Peterson do support this a little bit. They were 22nd in 2022 and 26th last year, but it's more so just something that you feel watching the Jags. There are countless just questionable run calls on the Jags film. There's a 3-and-out sequence of 3 straight inside runs week 1 against the Colts that'll make you want to pull your hair out. Against the Texans, there's a couple plays. After a huge chunk play before half, they run up to the line to run a quick toss at the goal line when they clearly don't have the numbers. Or just the countless amount of times in that game where they would make Will Anderson the read key, who, yes, he's a rookie, but a quick film study would tell you he has some of the best instincts and change of direction in the backfield. He is not the guy to let go unblocked and track you down in the backfield. Time and time again, even when they do go to those more traditional runs like inside zone or duo, they're doing it from very predictable formations and not mixing up their tendencies. You'll see teams stack the box, have true numbers advantages, and then the Jags have nothing in place to check out of it or call a timeout to not just waste a play running into a loaded box. And certainly everything we said about how they overcomplicate their run game is not doing their blockers any favors. not only are the schemes themselves putting them in difficult assignments with, a lack of leverage on certain blocks and having to get on the move and make difficult blocks, not to mention the running back where you've got tough reads and often having to kind of shake a guy that's getting half blocked in the backfield before you can get into your run and hit the right hole. So they're making things tougher on the player just by scheme, but because the run game is so complicated, oftentimes you see their linemen a little bit slow off the snap, second guessing their assignments, or just blowing assignments in general. And I think that all points to overall bad coaching, both in terms of how they approach the run game, but also how they're able to coach and communicate these guys' jobs to them. So at the end of the day, even if I actually like a lot of the stuff that Doug Peterson does in the pass game, they just make things so much harder on themselves by having one of the ugliest run games in the league. And they make things harder on their passing game because it's a lot more, third and long situations. And that really matters for an offensive head coach. And honestly, a lot of this is eerily reminiscent of what happened at the end of his tenure in Philadelphia, where the blocking went to shit, Carson Wentz broke, and he inevitably got fired. And you pair that with what we saw in the final 6 weeks of last season, and it's kind of hard to not have concerns about if Doug Peterson is the right guy for the job here. And I would so love to be wrong about this. I was happy to be wrong about this in the 2022-2023 season when this offense was super fun to watch. And there is a world where the passing game is great and some of these crazy run concepts come together a little bit more and they get a little bit more upside as they did in 2022, though their run game overall was still not great then. But I loved watching that Jags team and cheering for them and was so happy to be wrong. I think Doug's a good dude and deserves it, but I do have my questions. And if you think I'm a little low on the Jags, all these teams are very tightly knit. My little bit of pessimism on Doug Peterson and who he is as a head coach and the designer of this offense pretty much makes up the difference between the Jags and the next couple of teams. So I really think it matters. But let's talk more about the defensive side of things, where I'm certainly optimistic. I think Ryan Nielsen is an excellent hire. In fact, I had some questions about the Falcons going with a defensive head coach because I think Ryan Nielsen did a really good job for a defense that basically didn't have a defensive line and any corners not named A.J. Terrell, and they were still kind of overachieved based on their roster talent. Not to mention, he runs the scheme that is probably my favorite in the NFL, coming from Dennis Allen's defense in New Orleans. That's been one of the most underrated defenses of the decade, frankly, or at least the half decade. But he's going to run that 4-2, bump and run, in-your-face, aggressive type of defense. You're going to get a lot more man coverage here in Jacksonville. And maybe most importantly, you're going to get the ability for like Trayvon Walker to put his hand in the dirt, play 5-tech, use that big body to his best advantage, be more physical up front. And it's going to be a defense that couldn't be more opposite of what they ran last year with Caldwell from Todd Bowles' defense. That's much more of a complicated 3-4 type of defense with a lot of moving pieces up front. It's going to be much more stagnant, but it's going to allow these guys to play more discipline and play faster. And that's exactly what we've seen in New Orleans. We saw some guys step up in Atlanta last year. And as far as the coverages go, it's just a very aesthetically pleasing type of defense to watch, because this is, I think, the type of defense we all want to think we would run in the NFL, where we want to jam receivers at the line of scrimmage. We want to blitz on third down at the appropriate time, mix up our safeties on the back end, and let guys kind of buzz down and ball hawk while everybody else plays man. It's a very sound but aggressive overall defensive scheme. So I think it's a really good hire for the Jags. It's only his second year as a defensive coordinator, and it's not like the Falcons blew away the league on defense, even if they didn't have the best roster talent. So they rank out very solidly for defensive coaching with B- grades across the board, 23rd to 28th in pass defense coaching, and 17th to 28th in run defense coaching. Sounds low, but you also have to remember there's a lot of really good defensive coordinators in the NFL because most teams are busy hiring offensive-minded head coaches. So you have head coach caliber guys that are stuck as defensive coordinators. So even ranking as high as 23rd coming into the year is actually better than it probably sounds for the Jags. And I think Nielsen's going to do a really good job here and only climb those ranks in time. But now it's time to break down the roster. But first, I do want to thank the sponsor for today's video, Underdog Fantasy. Football season is fastly approaching here. Training camps are underway. But I'll tell you this, you don't have to wait till mid to late August to start doing fantasy drafts and start competing for money in your fantasy drafts, because right now you can draft for best ball leagues at Underdog Fantasy. Best ball is so fun. It is all about the draft, which, let's face it, is the best part of fantasy football. There's no trades, there's no waivers, there's no having to set your lineup every week. They will just retroactively set your highest scoring lineup based on the players you drafted here right now. And you can do $2 leagues just for fun, just because you want to draft and practice some, kind of mock draft situations for your home leagues. Or you can enter the big money leagues for a chance at huge winnings. However you want to play best ball, you can do it at Underdog Fantasy. You can also get ready for the weekly pick'ems, which in my opinion are the absolute best way to play daily fantasy and increase your interest in any given football Sunday or crappy Thursday night football matchup as well, maybe even more so with the former. But yeah, I love Underdog Fantasy. I'm super happy to be partnered with them. And right now, if you sign up using promo code TFG or just scan the barcode on the screen, they will give you up to a $250 match on your first deposit, and you will support my channel in a big way. So a massive thanks to Underdog. And now let's get into the roster, starting with the quarterback room with Trevor Lawrence fresh off a massive top-of-the-market contract extension. I have Trevor and the Jags ranked 8th in the NFL at quarterback. And for many people, especially those on Twitter, they're going to say that's too high for Trevor Lawrence. But I really think the hate has gone way too far on Trevor. And honestly, he's become one of the more underrated players in football discourse right now. And that's not to say he doesn't have his problems. And after he got banged up, looked like he was maybe going to have a season-ending knee injury or something in that Bengals game, week 13, and he came out and tried to battle through it. He played the worst football. I mean, let's ignore his rookie season because Urban Meyer, but other than rookie season, he played his worst football that we've seen yet. Down the stretch in those final 4 weeks was a contributor to the catastrophic end to the Jags season. Very fair to question how comfortable he was coming off of what looked like a really substantial injury. I think he showed a lot of toughness to battle through that, and those losses certainly weren't all on him. But obviously you pair the recency bias of how last year ended with the overall hype and expectations for this guy. Coming out of college, was dubbed the best prospect since Andrew Luck, and he hasn't quite reached those heights, though he's shown most of it, in my opinion at least. The man's already gotten a contract extension after 3 years. I mean, hell, the NFL agrees. He had 2 years of cheap control left, and the Jags paid up for him. But the people knew the hype. They saw how last season ended. They maybe drafted him in fantasy, and he didn't put up the stats that were expected of him, and now he's just not good anymore, right? That's how things work in NFL discourse, but fortunately not for us here on this channel and for those that watch this series. I, for one, still think Trevor Lawrence is really freaking good. I think he is currently a great NFL quarterback, well worth the money that the Jags paid him, and I actually think the arrow is only pointing up on him. I mean, he is not even 25 years old yet. He is younger than Jordan Love was in his breakout season last year. He's about the same age as some of the quarterbacks that just got drafted this year. Not too much older than Joe Burrow was when he entered the NFL. This guy is still young, still has so much to learn, so much to prove, and he's already given us exceptional quarterback play. And even last season, especially before that injury, he was playing at a very underrated level. And before I kind of talk and highlight his strengths and weaknesses, because he does have some weaknesses that I want to see him get better at, but before we even talk about that, I want to say Trevor Lawrence led the league in an unofficial stat known as he got screwed last year. And I know it sounds like you're making excuses, but anybody that actually watched him play and watched these games week in, week out, the amount of plays that Trevor Lawrence was executing his end of the deal, making great throws, great reads, making stuff happen, and the other side of it wasn't getting executed. And a lot of times it was to Calvin Ridley. I think that played a role in them not bringing him back, but it wasn't exclusive to Calvin Ridley. But the amount of times he's putting it right in a guy's breadbasket and he's not coming down with the catch, or it's at the sideline or in the corner of the end zone, and the receiver just couldn't get both feet in, but probably should have. Or a lot of times he's throwing the right ball to the right spot and these receivers aren't looking for the ball, whether it's a comebacker or an RPO. He also had a massive variety of interceptions that simply were not on him. Drops that get bounced into the air and are later intercepted. He had an interception against the Texans where there's a blatant pass interference on an RPO. Trevor throws the ball in the right spot, but the receiver's not able to get there because of an uncalled PI, and Derek Stingley ends up with a pick. There's another funny play against the Texans where he has one of his best plays of the year right before half, drops a dime, huge touchdown, at least we thought it was. They called him out of bounds at the 1 yard line, and then one of those vintage Doug Peterson horrible run calls shows up, and they end up not getting the touchdown before half. This stuff was happening week in, week out, and while everybody's complaining about his lack of touchdowns and how the Jags aren't winning games, the film simply says Trevor Lawrence is better than what he's producing right now. And again, the Jags clearly agreed. They did not hesitate to pay him. And I believe pretty firmly that he's going to pay it back to the Jags and be worth that money. I think at such a young age, he still has an above average processor, throws with anticipation. That is an area where I think there's still room for continued growth. I think some of his inconsistencies come from maybe once a game, once every other week, he's predetermining a read and not getting through his progressions in the way that he should, sometimes throwing the ball into harm's way, sometimes staring down a first read that he thought he was going to like a little bit too long, and then it's a little bit too late when he finally comes off of it. There's still room for him to go to be more of like a top 10 processor at the position, but I would say he's top 16, top half among starters in terms of processing and decision making as a quarterback from the pocket already at 24 and a half years old. And getting that more to the top 10 is going to be a very nice path for him to be more of a potentially elite quarterback, which I still think is in his realm of possibilities. But you got to talk about his arm talent, where he is one of the 5 best arms in the league. His precision and velocity on these deep outs it's right up there with Justin Herbert and like Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes. I mean, nobody should sit here and question if Trevor Lawrence has an elite arm. That was part of the hype, right? And he weaponizes that as good as just about any quarterback in the league. And he's able to make throws that the defense just isn't accounting for, specifically those deep outs where corners will sag off and curl flat defenders will shade inside or shade underneath because they don't think those throws are available to the quarterback. But Trevor's just a little different in that way. He forces you to defend every blade of grass on the football field. But some of these throws on the move as well, he makes some throws that you watch on the broadcast or even the first watch on All 22 and you're like, why did he throw that? Like, that was a stupid throw. And then you watch it back and you see how he anticipated a throwing window. And even if the defenders were close to it, he knew he could get it through that window, and he does with elite accuracy. Like, he makes some of the most insane throws throughout the course of an NFL season. And it's not just inside the pocket. Like I said, he does it on the move. And that plays into his ability as a playmaker, where he's got incredible athleticism. He's really good at sensing pressure when it gets in and doing something about it. He'll beat you with his feet as a scrambler. He adds stuff to the team as a designed runner. They'll give him 1 or 2 design runs a game. That doesn't hurt. And nobody his height really has any reason being as twitchy and as juiced up as an athlete as he is. Now, as we get to the negatives, I mentioned already, I wish his processing and decision-making could continue to grow to be more top 10. I think it's good enough for him to be a great quarterback, but if he's going to take that next step, I think that's where it all starts. The other area is he does have a little bit of kind of what we talked about with Justin Herbert, what we've said about Dak Prescott at times. in that I wish he would use his feet a little more. I wish he was a little bit better at kind of managing the pocket. I think there are times where he can get a little bit finicky against the rush, as opposed to kind of having that elite pocket feel to manage that space and extend the play within the pocket. There's flashes of brilliance there, and then there's times where he leaves a lot to be desired. I don't know if that's something that's coachable or if that's something that might limit him from being kind of a top 5 guy throughout time. I think we're still getting that answer. And then I just think he needs to do a little bit better job protecting the football, whether that's fumbling less or not forcing some of those reads via his processing and decision making. But none of those are like back-breaking weaknesses, anything that would hold him back from being one of those great franchise quarterbacks that can be a quarterback that you win because of. Like, I think there's 3 levels of quarterbacks that can legitimately win a Super Bowl. There's your elite Patrick Mahomes guys that can even carry you to a Super Bowl. There's guys maybe in that Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins, maybe Tua range where they're good players. If everything's great, you could probably win a Super Bowl with. And then I think there's the level in between that where they still need some help, but not as much help as the other guys. And they're pretty much guys that you would expect in a 15-year career will get at least one Super Bowl. And I think Trevor Lawrence is one of those dudes teetering on maybe being a guy that can carry this team even further, but still has some stuff to prove in that way. So I guess consider myself a big Trevor Lawrence fan, which is a good spot to be. I'm totally fine with people hating on Trevor Lawrence and me being able to be higher on him coming into this year. And I'll even go a step further. We haven't ranked CJ Stroud and the Texans yet, but they're not going to be higher than Trevor Lawrence. Not yet, at least. So the one big saving grace for the Jags is, at least at this point in time, in my opinion, they do still have the best quarterback in this division. Will he hold on to that? We'll see. But I do think a lot of quarterback rankings will already put Stroud over Trevor Lawrence. I think that's jumping the gun just a little bit. And we'll only see how that ages, right? But let's move on. You got Mac Jones as the backup here. I don't really want to spend a lot of time on Mac Jones. I felt like he completely went wild for the Patriots last year, stopped playing within himself, within the style of play that he's always had as that kind of savvy pocket passer. He doesn't have the traits to get into scramble drill quickly and put the team on his back like that. I think if he can reel things back in, he could be a really good backup in the NFL. I understand acquiring him. And I hope they can kind of talk him back into playing like Mac Jones, because I still think that's a useful player, maybe even a low-end starter, but definitely not betting on him to become that guy again. But if Trevor gets banged up for a couple weeks and you need a quarterback to step in and go 1-1, keep your season afloat, if you can get the old Mac Jones, can he do that? Yes, absolutely. But let's shift over to the weaponry, where I have the Jags ranked in the bottom half of the league. They get a B- grade, 19th to 24th. It's not a bad room. It's a respectable grade in a league full of teams with great weapons. Ultimately, I think this is a group that can get the job done, get this offense where they need to be if they're going to be a playoff team. But they do certainly have their questions and potentially a lack of upside. And I'm actually going to start with Christian Kirk, because I think he will be this team's number 1 wide receiver this year, even if he is primarily a slot guy. He missed some time last year and lost some targets to Calvin Ridley, but he's not even 28 years old yet. I think his film was just as good when healthy, and you go back a year, and this was a signing that myself and many people kind of laughed at, but he actually proved to be a very good signing, and at this point in time, what did he get, like $20 million a year? At this point in time, that's like a bargain based on how much the wide receiver market has shot up. He's still a damn good player. He's got a lot of explosiveness. He's a really challenging cover from the slot because he's got a lot more speed than a lot of slot corners have, and he's stronger than a lot of slot corners. He can, some teams like big slots, some teams like quick, smaller slots, and Christian Kirk can really handle both those guys. He's got the play strength to bang with bigger corners, and the quickness and speed to separate from those guys when they can't keep up with him. And inversely, I mean, if he's got a smaller corner, yeah, he can run routes and separate against those guys, but he can win at the catch point by being stronger than them. I mean, in many ways, he's built like a running back. And he is incredibly useful within this system. Doug Peterson basically every play is going to have some form of crossing route designed on the play. And Christian Kirk running either a short drag or a deep cross is at his best. So they pinpointed his skill set and have put him in a position to succeed. And I think from a fantasy football perspective, this is someone I'm definitely targeting. He's got that chemistry with Trevor Lawrence. I think he has all of the bit of the juice that they need from him. I think we see something close to 90 receptions, 1,100 yards, 5 or 6 touchdowns. I don't know exactly where his ADP is right now, but I think it's well below that. So this is the guy I'm targeting, I think, in fantasy, and this is the guy that Trevor will be targeting. Until Brian Thomas can really establish himself, Kirk is the most explosive piece here, and he's the most reliable in terms of hands and converting, difficult short yardage situations. That said, is it ideal that he's your number one wide receiver or your best wide receiver? No. And he's certainly a reason that the Jags are not in the top half for weaponry because they don't have that dominant piece. But he is certainly a linchpin for them, I think, especially this year with no more Jeudy. Because you look at Gabe Davis and you look at where this team fell short last year with a lot of the stuff we talked about in terms of, catching balls at the sideline, winning tough catches down the sideline, being a reliable vertical threat for Trevor Lawrence. And it makes sense why they signed someone like Gabe Davis for his skill set, but has Gabe Davis delivered on what the Bills have hoped for him to be as their number 2 wide receiver and their primary vertical threat? No, absolutely not. They very willingly let him go. And they did that because he's just inconsistent. He doesn't have the route running prowess or athleticism to run a wide variety of routes, and he doesn't have what it takes to separate at a super high level. So you're looking at a guy that's going to get a really high average depth of target down the sideline, and someone that you're going to ask to have a high contested catch win rate, to work the sidelines, have consistent hands on comebackers where you might find the ball a little bit late and have to show your hands and still come down with it. And that's where he's just been all over the place, let alone some of the bad focus drops that he's had that he needs to have. He has his usefulness. He's going to have his big games because they're high leverage targets and he can win on them. Again, I understand the skill set that they're looking for here, but I think they overpaid for it based on what he's going to give them. It's not the end of the world, and he can play his role within this offense for now, but that's where Brian Thomas Jr. comes into play here if this team wants to really reach their upside as an offense. And he's polarizing, man. I could see this going anywhere from he beats out Gabe Davis by like week 6, because I don't think he's going to beat out Gabe Davis right away. They gave Gabe too much money. But I could see as early as week 6 as the third wide receiver, still getting a lot of deep vertical threats. I could see Brian Thomas just being so much better that eventually they're like, yeah, we're just going to flip these guys, and Brian Thomas is the number 2. And I could see him being really a monster as a rookie. I loved his tape. I love his speed. I think he's underrated as a route runner. LSU didn't ask him to run a wide variety of routes, but I thought he showed plenty of nuance and foot speed. I think people were a little too harsh on him being one-dimensional. I think that was just because it was already a simple offense and they had Malik Neighbors to do a lot of the more challenging stuff. But I do think Brian Thomas can handle more, especially in time. But I think he tracks the deep ball. I think his lack of ball skills were overstated. He had a couple drops, but this isn't like a full-on MVS situation. Honestly, the prospect I saw reminded me a lot of Christian Watson for the Packers, minus the injury concerns. And that's a damn good wide receiver. So I thought this was, frankly, a steal when the Jags got him. I love how he fits for all of the reasons we talked about with Gabe Davis coming in here. For Trevor to have a legit, potentially dominant or elite deep threat with his arm talent and all of the almost completions that he had last year is super, super exciting. But that is all in sort of a best case scenario for this season. There's a range of outcomes on him. While I think his hands and lack of diverse route running was overstated, he still has to prove that those things aren't going to be issues at the NFL level. He still has to beat out Gabe Davis for the primary deep threat role. I would even argue those skill sets are a little bit redundant within this first season with Brian Thomas. So there's still a lot to prove, but for me, it's much more of a question of when as opposed to if. I do believe in the fit here, but they've muddied up the waters a little bit with Gabe Davis here. But it doesn't stop there. You do have Evan Ingram, who is half wide receiver, half tight end, maybe 4/5 wide receiver, 1/5 tight end. He wears a lot of hats for this offense, and he's really impressed me here in Jacksonville. I think he's quite easily emerged as a top tight end, a top 10 tight end. He's one of the most athletic tight ends in the league. That's because he's more of just a wide receiver. But he's been winning way more tough catches than he ever did as a Giant, as a former first-round pick. He's been a real weapon after the catch. He's a real mismatch problem. Too big for slot wide receivers, too fast for safeties and linebackers. And within this spread-style offense where they put him as a big slot, they'll run that 3-by-1 formation where he's alone as a wide receiver on one side with trips to the other, kind of like the Chiefs do with Travis Kelce. They can do that with him. He's a really important piece here, man, because without him, this would probably rank more close to like a bottom 6 group of weapons. But he's a key cog in the short to intermediate that I think will allow this group to ultimately be solid to good this year. And then your last kind of starting cog here is Travis Etienne, who's a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, his athleticism is remarkable. He's productive. He's one of the best screen threats in the NFL. You can line him out wide. He even shows some flashes where he looks like a wide receiver flexed out wide. He can run routes out of the backfield. But where he has left a lot to be desired within this offense is he's had drops, and he's not the best pass protector. But in terms of bringing another explosive piece into the mix, someone that can really make you pay if you're not accounting for him, especially underneath, but sometimes down the field, he will almost certainly have his moments where he will make you pay. So it is actually a very well-rounded group with a diversity of skill sets and a lot of different ways to beat you. But it is that lack of a true number one and the fact that your tight end and running back are your second and third most talented receivers at this point in time that just it slides them down the rankings a little bit. And I think that's more than fair, but I wouldn't say this group holds them back. This is certainly an explosive, talented enough group for Trevor to get a lot out of. But let's talk about the depth. So Devin Duvernay gets brought in here primarily as a return guy. He had a falling out in Baltimore. He was in a position to kind of win a starting job in 2022 and started strong, but just fell off. And then they just essentially replaced all his snaps with Odell Beckham. I'm still not fully done with Devin Duvernay, especially in this offense. He, from a skill set perspective, is very similar to Christian Kirk. Obviously not nearly as proven, but as a backup to Kirk, I like that. But the next guy on the depth chart is not going to make that easy on Devin Duvernay to win that opportunity. Parker Washington, who was a rookie last year, someone that I thought fell further in the draft than he should have, and is a tough physical slot wide receiver with a lot of similar skills as Christian Kirk, just not quite as fast as Kirk or even a Duvernay. But he got on the field later in the season, and it was a bit of a mixed bag. He came in, in the middle of a game. Christian Kirk went down, and they must have had a plan to get Kirk the ball in that game. And Parker Washington stepped into that role and went 6 for 6, 61 yards and a touchdown, and then kind of faded away after that. But I think, you've got a pair of really useful backups there between Parker Washington and what he could be and Devin Duvernay. And I will say long term, I will stand by that. I think, maybe 2-3 years from now, there's a world where Parker Washington replaces Christian Kirk, assuming everything stays in place and Doug Peterson keeps his job and they want that role. But it does make sense to me. And then you've got kind of an open competition. You've got Tim Jones, who has gotten some snaps for this team. He's more of a balanced type of wide receiver. And then you have really 3 kind of talented, bigger-bodied, deep threat types, all that have taken kind of different paths and are different types of prospects, I suppose. Cooks was a small school undrafted rookie last year, who I liked. Williams was a highly touted prospect that kind of fell in the draft and hasn't been able to put it together in the NFL. And Denzel Mims, the most The biggest name out of this group, they bring him in. I think we're all kind of done believing in Denzel Mims at this point, but the physical talent's there. All just kind of dart throws at that deep threat that they're clearly looking for here. And then you got another slot guy in Austin Trammell. So it's a motley crew of backups. There's better rooms. There's worse rooms. At tight end, depth, and frankly, starting tight end, because Evan Ingram's not really a tight end in a lot of their formations. This is where this team is really lacking with players that are getting a lot of playing time. And frankly, I wish they would have done a little bit more. Luke Farrell, he's just not dynamic. He's had solid enough hands when they have thrown him the ball, but there's nothing to write home about there. He was Urban Meyer's guy that just probably was overdrafted because he was Urban Meyer's guy out of Ohio State. And then Brent and Strange talk about overdrafted. Not to ring my bell too early, but I called this one of the worst picks in the draft last year, and I just didn't see any receiving prowess, and certainly didn't show that in year one. They did bring in Josiah DeGuara, who's very similar to Brenton Strange as a kind of hybrid-y tight end H-back type that was way overdrafted when he came out. DeGuara to the Packers. For what it's worth, I think DeGuara is probably the second best receiving threat on this team outside of Evan Ingram, but he's been all over the place for Green Bay. And then you got more nepotism there. Josh Peterson, who hasn't played yet. Considering that some variety of these guys are going to play, I mean, between Strange and Farrell last year, that was 725 snaps. That's effectively a starter between the two of them. I wish they had someone you'd be a little bit more excited about there. So I really don't love that. And then the running back depth is really nothing to get excited about. Maybe Keelan Robinson as a scat back out of Texas can surprise. But, I mean, Bigsby couldn't really catch the ball at Auburn and struggled to do that in his rookie year, so I'm not expecting him to take some leap there. And Dearness Johnson's, just doesn't have the traits to be a great receiving back. So it's just depth, but these guys kind of will all play, and ultimately there's just nothing to really get too excited about beyond your starting five. But let's talk running back here. And I do think Travis Etienne is super talented. Does he have the occasional run where he doesn't see a hole or tries to bounce things outside a little too much? Yes. I wish his vision was a little bit better, and I think that's what keeps him out from being like a superstar elite running back. But it's not bad enough to hold him back like someone like DeAndre Swift that we talked about for the Bears. He's not that bounce happy. He will still, for the most part, hit the right hole. And I don't think this run scheme does him any favors in terms of making things clear for him either. Sometimes he's got to just guess and hope he guesses right. But in terms of traits, size, the combination of explosiveness and power, you love what you get from Travis Etienne. He's year in, year out, going all the way back to college. I mean, always towards the top of his peers in terms of missed tackle force percentage, great contact balance. And there are runs, too, that he shows some creativity to, like dead runs. He will bounce things outside when it's appropriate, show good vision in that way, and turn nothing into explosive runs. So, I mean, his yards per carry last year was under 3.8 yards per carry to be exact. And some people might look at the stats and be like, that's not a top 10 running back in the league. But I think he himself is. Now, the Jags in total actually rank 13th at running back because their depth is horrible. There are some teams that rank higher for me because they have the rotational backs or the 1-2 punches that guarantee that you always have a talented back on the field. Teams like the Cardinals or the Steelers, who we broke down, they're going to rank higher than the Jags when, Travis Etienne is one of the closest things to a workhorse back that we have in the league. He got 75% of the carries, but that still means 1 every 4 carries, you're giving the ball to Dearness Johnson, who outside of one random breakout season in Cleveland has been a very mediocre kind of backup caliber running back, was the same in Jacksonville last year, gave this team an even worse 2.6 yards per carry. So that goes to show you like how much Travis Etienne is getting above sort of like a replacement level player. That's a massive gap. And then Tank Bigsby was horrible, man. That was another Trent Baalke pick that I really spoke out against, said he was not worth a third-round pick, and he was unplayable in his rookie season. Couldn't hit the right hole, hesitation, fumbles, showed a little bit more promise at the end of the year, but this is not a player that I'm betting on. So, frankly, I would love to see the Jags go out and get something to be a better complement to Travis Etienne, whether that's making a trade for a Khalil Herbert or a Chuba Hubbard or seeing if there's anybody in free agency worth a damn. If they want to get this run game going, get a little bit more out of the 25% of the carries that you're not giving to Travis Etienne. And just give you someone that you don't have to, wear down Travis Etienne for 270 carries again. So, again, they get a B grade. They rank 13th at running back. It's well above average, and I like Travis Etienne. Again, I think he's a top 10 back. He's going to elevate this run game. Case in point, the yards per attempt difference between Dearness Johnson and Travis Etienne. But it's certainly a group that I would do a little bit more about. In terms of the QB run multiplier, I mentioned it a little bit with Trevor Lawrence, but they will tap into his athleticism a little bit. He gets about 2 carries per game on design runs, usually just a read option, but he's certainly enough of a threat that teams have to account for that, and he can change the numbers. And if this team would just run like normal inside zone more, you could tap into that idea that teams are going to have to keep that backside end more honest, but they don't. It seems like they're either, for the most part, going like crazy wild trap or crunch or all these different run concepts, or they're running read option. But you could play into that phantom threat a little bit more, create a numbers advantage just running inside zone and leaving the backside end unblocked because he's going to be more focused on Trevor Lawrence. So, I don't know, just a thought, but they do still get some boost from that threat. But let's talk offensive line for the last group for the offense. And to me, it's not a bad offensive line. They rank 22nd for me, so pretty solid. But they're very one-dimensional. They end up ranking smack dab in the middle of the league for pass blocking, 16th to 17th, but damn near towards the bottom for run blocking, 27th to 30th. And there's really only one guy on this unit that I would say is a better run blocker than he is a pass blocker, and that's Ezra Cleveland. Everybody else is more pass blocking forward. So that's where you get that split. But let's go left to right. It looks like it's going to be another year Cam Robinson at left tackle. He's been a good player for them. He has overall been a hit as a second-round pick. Dealt with a suspension early last year, but came back very strong. I think he re-cemented himself as the left tackle for this team. There were some questions on if Walker Little was maybe going to overtake him, but he's just very solid in pass protection. He's got a really good anchor. His technique is good enough. He will have some ugly losses where he's either his feet are lagging behind or he misses a stunt or his hands miss. He's not the most high-end, consistent pass-protecting left tackle, but he's certainly good enough. Really where you wish he was better was in run blocking. He has the play strength to be a good run blocker, and I don't think the complexity of this run scheme helps. I think it'd be much better if you're just letting him go north and south, drive guys backwards, but that's not the case. I think he blows a lot of assignments, misses his strikes, is slow off the ball a lot, but you can't – at some point the players do have to do something, and he's just been a really bad run blocker for them. So that holds him back as an overall player. But then at left guard, this is going to be your weak link, Ezra Cleveland. They traded for him. He was, a 6th-round pick, and then he ends up getting a bottom-of-the-market starting guard contract. I think that all adds up. I totally understand why Minnesota let go of him. He's closer to a liability in pass protection than he is a strength. Gives you kind of replacement level play as a pass blocker. He just lacks play strength and can get turned around against stunts and finesse moves quite a bit. That said, he is a good athlete and a try-hard as a run blocker. I think he really struggled with this new system coming in mid-season, and trying to pick everything up was, I think, really hard for him. So hopefully he can take a step up next year with the Jags. I think they're certainly projecting that by giving him a contract extension, because honestly, he played like a backup when he came in. He played really bad, and even giving him a 72 run block grade is more of a credit to him being a pretty good run blocker in Minnesota. Now, that was more of a simplified wide zone heavy system where his athleticism was really effective for him. It's still a projection to say that he can block better in this system, but hopefully, not coming in week 8 and having to learn the most complicated run scheme in the league and getting a whole offseason to like understand his assignments and stuff can get him up to speed a little bit and maybe even can grade out better in that phase than we're giving him here. But we're kind of splitting the difference there because he was just straight up bad last year. But like I said, he's your weak link. The rest of it you feel pretty good about. You bring in Mitch Morse, who's a very solid veteran signing. His play has started to reduce in terms of overall efficiency. He hasn't been much of a run blocker for the Bills over the last couple of years, but an incredibly heady center, has 1 million snaps under his belt, good technique, enough of an anchor to be a good pass blocker. Again, don't expect too much from him in the run game. Should be fairly assignment sound, though, which would be an upgrade from what they had from Luke Fortner last year, who, again, just had no idea what he was doing out there. Yet another Trent Baalke pick that I was like, really? He's going to be your starting center? And they wasted 2 years with him. So you should be getting better play there. I think that's, the biggest true upgrade that this offense got from last year to this year. Then you got Brandon Sheriff at right guard, a true rock. His athleticism isn't quite what it used to be, which has shown up in his run blocking. Once upon a time was one of the just biggest dickhead type of blockers, was someone that would have led the league in pancake blocks every year, that type of dude back in his prime for Washington. He's not so much that anymore. Still has good play strength and can displace guys off the ball. But from a pass blocking perspective, very sound, good strength, good technique. So you feel really good about him at right guard. He had a good bounce back year last year as well. 2022 was rough for him as he played through injury. But even at 33 years old, you feel like you're going to get a good right guard there in Brandon Sheriff. And then really where I walked away impressed with this team maybe was Anton Harrison. I felt like I was pretty middle of the road up until I started watching film for this episode on Anton Harrison. Coming out as a prospect, I was like, yeah, late first, give him a chance. We'll see what he can be. I didn't love him. I didn't hate him. And then even as the season went on, I didn't really think too much of Anton Harrison, but really getting into the weeds on the All-22, I'm kind of in love. Like, I really like what I saw from him, exclusively in pass protection. And I do remember really liking his hands at Oklahoma, and this might be a bit of a tangent just for future reference to kind of stash this in the back of our minds, but I did say on him coming out, I was like, I'd rather have the guy whose hands are good and you have to fix his feet as opposed to the other, because I think having good hands is more of a you either have it or you don't type of thing, kind of like a talented boxer where you're just really accurate with your strikes and can time them well and have the ability to punch strong. I know that's certainly something I struggled with as an offensive lineman, but he definitely has good hand placement and good hand usage, and he's a good athlete, so he can get range, he can have quick feet. It's just a matter of consistency with his feet. When he did lose, it was not recognizing an inside counter or not quite getting that last step in his kick slide. I think that stuff is very correctable, and it honestly, as the year went on, he was pretty much locked down. He dominated Will Anderson. He put Will Anderson in a box. So if he's able to win that matchup consistently in this division, that's going to be something to keep an eye on for sure. Could be a lot of years of that. But yeah, I think he's got the goods. I think he has the sauce, especially if he can continue to add play strength as well while he cleans up his feet. You could really be in business with a hit here on Anton Harrison. Now, that does take me to the weakness on his game, and that is run blocking and play strength. I think he's able to slow down the bull rush from a play strength perspective with his good hand placement. More often than not, he's getting those inside hands and getting that first strike. But from a run blocking perspective, he can't move people. And you pair that with him in a complicated scheme, second guessing himself, being late to blocks, whiffing on assignments. It was not good run blocking tape. And I don't know that that's ever going to be there with him. You hope it can come along, but even if it doesn't, some of the best tackles of the decade were not phenomenal run blockers, and you will certainly live with it if he turns into a lockdown pass protecting tackle. So again, I walked away really impressed by Anton Harrison. I'm definitely on board. I've kind of played it down the middle and not really had a strong opinion on him, but I'm on the train. I like Anton Harrison. And frankly, after watching him, I kicked up the Jags pass blocking grades a little bit. But likewise, I lowered their run blocking grades a little bit looking at this too. So it ultimately came out pretty close to where we had them before getting into the film. But again, sometimes these ratings can slide up and down a little bit, getting into the weeds for each episode, because I put the ratings together in May. So sometimes my opinion will evolve over the course of my summer and my research. But anyway, it's a very solid group in pass protection. Certainly going to contribute to Trevor's success and tapping into these weapons, and Doug Peterson being a good pass game coach. There's a bit of a theme here with the offense being more pass game oriented, but it isn't perfect there. And certainly from a run blocking perspective, you don't have a great player on this O-line, and you got more questions probably than you do answers. So I don't know that we're going to see some crazy evolution in the run blocking for the Jags. Now, they do have good depth, specifically at tackle. Love Walker Little. I still think Walker Little deserves to be a starter somewhere in the league. Like, if I'm Washington or, San Francisco, bring him close to home where he played at Stanford, Baltimore, like any team that needs a tackle, I'm calling Jacksonville about Walker Little. Highly recruited dude that had a bad injury in college, ends up falling to the second round and just hasn't really been given a full-time look here in Jacksonville, hasn't been able to cement himself in and get acclimated, get that chemistry and continuity on the offensive line. But I very much think he can be a starting caliber left or right tackle in the league. So maybe that's long-term here over Cam Robinson. Maybe he's a good trade candidate. If you could get a third for Walker Little, I think you take that. And I would make that trade for a lot of teams. New England, another one. Get on the phone. And if you're Jacksonville, you probably especially do that if you get to camp and you like what you see from Javon Foster, because I thought this was another really good pick. The Jags have quietly been picking well at tackle for all the Trent Baalke hate. We'll see how this plays out, but I really like Javon Foster. I think a lot of worse tackles were drafted ahead of him. Two of the teams we just named, Patriots, Washington, took left tackles at the top of the third. I think they're in time going to regret not going with the Javon Foster. Not sure if he's going to play here, but I believe in the talent and could be a reason you might think to get something for Walker Little so that you can waste that pick next year on a third-string tight end or running back as they've done. Blake Hance is here as well. He's been a good run blocker. Okay enough backup, can play a little guard, can play a little tackle. Luke Fortner as a backup is much closer to what he should be. He's still not even close to the best backup center in the league, but he has now played 2 years as your starter in this system. So if you have to go back to that, you're at least comfortable with it. And then Tyler Shatley has also played a lot, was really bad last year, but was much better in 2022. So, between those two and Hance, there's worse interior depth in the league. But I would imagine those are your five that you're keeping around. I do have to make a note. The Jags are one of the worst ranked teams in terms of skill player run blocking. It actually drags them down a couple spots relative to where their O-line is. Evan Ingram is a straight liability. Your wide receivers are nothing special as run blockers. And as we mentioned already, Luke Farrell and Brenton Strange will play a lot. Neither of those guys are any good as blockers. Brenton Strange is okay as a move blocker. 2 out of 3 times he's got really good blocks coming cross formation as kind of a H-back and kind of blindsiding defenders. So he has some usefulness there, but he's also not like someone that you're comfortable putting his hand in the dirt and block and digging out a defensive end. So if he's your best run blocking skill player, that's not much to speak of. So you put all this together, and it shouldn't be a surprise here. The pass game ranks much higher than the run game. They came out very well with pass game. They ranked 12th. You've got a great quarterback, a good enough group of weapons. I think the pass blocking is very solid, a good coach for the pass game. They should be able to sling the rock, man. And this is your path to a playoff offense, is throwing the ball around, get some slight growth from the O-line and Trevor, and maybe see Brian Thomas Jr. step up, and you got a top 10 passing game. More often than not, a top 10 passing game is going to be a playoff team. But the run game, I expect more of the same, man. I hate the coaching. I hate the running back depth. And I definitely hate the run blocking. I love that you have ETN here, but there's only so much he can do, as we've seen in the last 2 years. So they ranked 24th for run game, which is kind of in between what they were in 2022 and 2023, or the last 2 seasons, rather. Overall, it's good for 16th offensively. But let's talk a little defense here, because I think this defense has just as much fascinating stuff to talk about as the offense did. And the strength of this defense should be this defensive line, where they rank damn near top 10, tied for 9th to 11th, with a B grade for overall defensive line for me, B in pass rush, very close there, 9th to 13th. And then they're in that kind of cluster of above average run defense defensive lines, ranking 5th to 13th. There's not a lot of groups grading out well in terms of D-line run defense in the league right now. But let's start on the edge. You have Josh Allen, who I think has entered the conversation for the best edge rusher that's not an elite edge rusher. To me, you have your 5 elite edge rushers, Garrett, Parsons, Bosa, Watt, and Crosby. And then you have another group of guys that I just wouldn't call elite, but are true number one game-wrecking players. Guys that will more often than not win their one-on-ones, but are also guys that demand shifts towards them, demand chips. So they provide advantages in the sense of which direction slides are going to go towards, and they can change the numbers game in the passing game by making an extra guy stay in to block them. Those are your true number ones, and Josh Allen is one of them. What's exciting about Josh Allen is we have yet to see his development curve stop. Say whatever you want about PFF grades, but for a guy that was drafted as a much more raw kind of developmental edge guy with insane traits, top 10 pick, hard to call him truly developmental. He had a high floor coming out, but was definitely more on the raw side of prospects. For a guy drafted like that you want to see year-to-year development, how satisfying is it to see all 5 years of his career, with 2020 being a year that he only, he missed some time. But this is a guy that has gotten better every single year, just as you would hope. That's a testament to his work ethic. It's a testament to his talent. And the question becomes, does it stop here? I mean, he seems to have reached about the extent of his upside, but there is not a single lack of physical traits in his body. And I think he's done a good job, not just in terms of developing the skill set, because he played like hybrid stuff at Kentucky. He was very much just winning as a rusher off of power and athleticism, but he's added a hump move and pass rush moves and all these different counter moves to consistently win as a rusher. But he's not just evolving on the field. He's also added play strength and looks the part, much more of that freaky, dominant, do-it-all edge rusher. He played much lighter at Kentucky, and that play strength aspect to his game has showed up in his ability as a power rusher, but his ability as a run defender, and he still has all the athleticism in the world. So there's no physical limitations to say he can't have one more year and cement himself in that elite tier. And I think it's much more of a question of showing us, can he do that again, as opposed to, did he play at that level? Because all those elite guys have done it for more than one season. But Josh Allen's production last year, 90 pressures, 17 and a half sacks. I mean, hell, if the Jags were a better defense and a team more in the spotlight, he very well might have been in the Defensive Player of the Year discussion with Myles Garrett. But yeah, he's that dude. It's been really fun to see him turn into that. And he's obviously a key reason why the Jags are effectively a top 10 pass rush and defensive line here. But the question is, how much help is Josh Allen, now Josh Hines Allen, really going to get here? Enter the Eric Armstead signing. Because this front office knows, as much as they want Trayvon Walker to be that legit number 2 opposite of Josh Allen, they can't now triple down on their decision to take him number 1 and count on him to be a difference maker to support someone like Josh Allen. If you have a guy that's going to demand double teams, it has a force multiplying effect if you have another guy that can consistently beat one-on-ones. And they haven't had that guy yet. They are hoping that's Eric Armstead, who is a complete handful on the interior. He's been a really efficient pass rusher. Definitely, when healthy, can be that guy for this Jags team, as he's been for the Niners. And even though he's 31, he is coming off a career year. 58 pressures, 8 sacks. Definitely still has it. Now, he is coming off, he's currently on the PUP list. They don't seem too worried about it, but every day we get closer and closer to real football. It'll be something to keep an eye on, but they're expecting him to be healthy. And they gave him a bunch of money to be that dude. And is definitely my favorite thing that this team did, because I just haven't looked at this Jags front and really been scared of it, as good as Josh Allen's been. And now with Armstead, I think they have 2 potential difference makers. And then in a dream scenario, they can have 3 with Trayvon Walker, right? And I've had plenty of discourse with Jags fans on Trayvon Walker and where I'm at with Trayvon Walker, where we are or should be at with Trayvon Walker as a football people. Obviously made a lot of noise when he was the number 1 overall pick. Pretty much every draft analyst agreed that was a really bad decision. And went into watching the film on the Jags here for this video, and I wanted to throw away my preconceived notions on him, detach myself from the take that was a horrible draft pick, and just watch the film, give him every chance to impress me and walk away excited about Trayvon Walker. And unfortunately, I didn't walk away impressed. Now, I don't think he's horrible. I think he's fine. I think he is nearly identical to DJ Wanham for the Vikings, who is a big physical edge that, because he plays a gazillion snaps, is going to walk into some sacks. He's going to win some pass rush reps from time to time. A streaky run defender, but can have some good wins. I think Trayvon Walker has played like a number 3 edge that is pushed into the role of a true starter that plays a lot of snaps because he was the number 1 overall pick. I think he's played much closer to kind of what he was as a prospect before he got in his underwear and ran around in Indianapolis as a late first, early second round type of prospect. I think he's played much closer to that caliber of prospect as opposed to the number 1 overall pick. And Jags fans will say, oh, but he had 10 sacks last season. Okay, first off, sacks are not how you should be judging players. Players walk into sacks all the time when quarterbacks are flushed out of the pocket, or, a stunt-heavy defense like Jacksonville had last year can scheme a guy up in open rush. Or he's playing cleanup man to a guy like Josh Allen who's actually winning his one-on-one matchups. There is no reason for sacks to be your defining metric of pass rush success in the year 2024 with all of the film-based data that we have available. But, of course, he had a bunch of sacks. He was 17th in the NFL in pass rush snaps last year. Only 4 players in the top 17 players for pass rush snaps last year didn't have 10 sacks. And only 3 players in those top 17 had under 60 pass rush pressures. It was him, Byron Young, and to the credit of Jags fans, Kayvon Thibodeau, who I did say would have been a better pick than Trayvon Walker. He's going through similar issues. Luckily, I did say you should draft Garrett Wilson instead of either of those guys. But at least I've been wrong to this point on Thibodeau being the better prospect. They've both been pretty damn similar. But beyond the sacks, he was 70th out of 120 in pass rush win rate. Again, if there's 64 starting edge rushers in the league, 70th puts him very low end 2/high end 3. That's the level he's played at. That's just the metrics back it up. And I watch the film and I see a guy that has yet to really learn how to package all those traits together to win with a dominant bull rush. You will see the occasional flashes, just as you might from a DJ Wanham, for example. But that was one of my big issues with him at Georgia was not only is he insanely raw and doesn't have any counter move or any really bag of pass rushing skills at all, but even his bull rush was underwhelming because he doesn't really connect his lower body and his upper body together to generate power off of his first step. It's just a clunky bull rush that's oftentimes ineffective. So you see that, and he was supposed to be this incredibly high-floor run defender. He's been mediocre to average as a run defender. He'll have his splash plays because of his length. He's not a low-effort player, but even there, he's far from some dominant run defender. You hardly notice him out there. So he has been a massive disappointment. You're lying to yourself as a Jags fan if you say otherwise. Now, at the same time, I'm not going to sit here and entirely die on the hill that he can't get better, right? He turns 24 in December. And on top of that, I I do like this new scheme for him. I think putting him with his hand in the dirt is going to do really nice things for him. I think he's much more of a north and south player, and messing around with all this 2-point stuff has been a waste of time. Dropping him into cover, like he's pretty good at dropping into coverage because he's such a unique athlete, but that's not the best use of what he could be. And I think messing around with that, asking him to defend the run from a stand-up 2-point stance, that's not tapping into his his size and his length to the best of your advantage. So I think putting him with his hand in the dirt is the best thing they could do for him. I think as a rusher, just line him up as a wide 9, let him loose, explode out of his stance, try to drive guys back. I think rushing from a 2-point stance makes things much harder on him to figure out the bull rush as well. So there's potential there, certainly. And I think as a run defender, simplifying things could lead to some gains in his consistency against the run too. So I like the scheme change. And for what it's worth, one thing I did notice from his film is he does get chipped a lot, even if they're doing the same with Josh Allen. Teams were still trying to slow him down. For one reason or another, it's not like when they left him one-on-one, he would kill them. But he did deal with a lot of chip blocks, I think carrying that former number 1 overall pick, and he gets off the bus and looks the way he does. Teams want to chip block him. So there are a lot of snaps where he's not getting a great opportunity to destroy one-on-ones. So I will give him some nods in that direction. And I think a somewhat likely good scenario for him is he can be something like what Carl Granderson is for the Saints, where he's at least a good enough pass rusher to be a number 3 here, get that pass rush win rate up, win one-on-ones more consistently, and become a much more consistent run defender. I think that would be a good start in terms of actually seeing some growth here from Trayvon Walker in a better system fit for him. And then, if he shows a little bit more on film, I'm more than happy to take the next step in the conversation with him. But right now, I'm not excited about him. I'm not going to bet on him to take some big leap, if much of a leap at all. I do just think he lacks the instincts and isn't much of a football player. I think he's a good athlete. He's obviously an incredible athlete. That's why he went number 1 overall. But even then, I think he's overrated as an athlete. But he's just out there trying to win with his athleticism, and it just hasn't gotten him too far so far. I mean, we're heading towards the Jags declining his 5th-year option at this point. And if you don't see growth from him, you're going to walk out of this year being like, man, I wish we got a lot more from our number 2 edge, because this pass rush could have been special if we just had, like Leonard Floyd or Preston Smith, even just like a capable number 2 guy off the edge opposite of Allen, because Walker's not that right now. And Jags fans, if you are telling yourself otherwise, you're just lying to yourselves right now. You want to continue to believe in the theoretical upside of him, that's fine. But he just, at this point, has been a massive disappointment. But let's move on. Talk about the rest of the starters here. So I do think we see a bit of a rotation, because this is going to be more of a 4-man front now, as opposed to a lot of the 5-man fronts they like to run under the old Todd Bowles defense, or Todd Bowles inspired defense under Mike Caldwell. But Roy Robertson Harris, I think, is going to get a lot of third down work, especially early in the season, if they're trying to make sure Armstead can stay healthy coming off the pup, because he's like Armstead, kind of a long, unique tweener type of a body type. But he is just an overall useful player. And for a tweener, he's better defending the run than he should be. You can put him as a 3-tech, and he can actually hold his own and be an adequate run defender there. So I like him. He's a very nice 4th piece to have here. And then Devon Hamilton's a bit of a wild card, but I think he's going to be at least a pretty good run defender, kind of being the space eater in the middle of the defense. They're going to run a lot of even fronts, but with how this D-line's built, I think they might slide it a little bit more and have Hamilton more as a 1 or a 0, with Armstead / Harris as a 3, and then Walker as a true 5, or even head up on the tackle. They've been very multiple with their fronts in New Orleans over the years. So I do think we get, if they have a nose tackle, it's going to be Devon Hamilton, and he's pretty good at that. I mean, he really started to break out in 2022, And they paid him off the promise of upside and the good stuff that he showed that year. And then he got hurt and missed pretty much all of last season. What do we show? He played like 17% of their snaps. But yeah, he's going to be a good run defender, and he's sneaky good as a rusher too. He's got some quick feet and some pass rush moves. I mean, he could teach Trayvon Walker a swim move or two, but he just doesn't obviously have the physical tools to complement that. But I think he's going to be a good player and is a bit of a forgotten man up front. Currently not even listed as a starter, but I feel pretty confident saying he's going to rotate with Robertson Harris. And then you get to the depth. There's not a ton to speak of off the edge. They bring in Travis Gibson. For one reason or another, teams haven't fully believed in him. The Bears' new front office came in and let him go after he looked good young. And then he played really efficiently for Tennessee on like 90 snaps last year, but they didn't keep him around despite needing edge players. So can't fully answer why he's been available for so cheap, but he's been pretty efficient as a rusher when he's played. Not quite the run defender that he is as a pass rusher, but he's a nice backup to have. Then you got some just kind of draft and develop types. Yasir Abdullah, a day 3 pick last year. Will be interesting to see how he fits the scheme because he was already kind of a hybrid edge type that was more specific for last year's system. Might be more of a Sam on-ball linebacker in this type of system. We'll see. And then, of course, Miles Cole was the most obvious 7th-round pick ever, where Trent Baalke just said, give me the guy with the longest arms on the D-line. He's a horrible football player. Take all of the things we said about Trayvon Walker, just like not knowing what he's doing, and just ramp that up 5,000 times over. I mean, you watch Miles Cole's tape at Texas Tech's not a low level of competition, but, against Big 12 offensive linemen, and you're like, you should be kicking these guys' ass, and he just didn't. So I don't think there's much there. He's already 25 years old, but I guess why not in the 7th round? The one guy actually that I think could be sneaky useful for this team is Esezi Otomewo. Right now they're listing him as an interior defensive lineman. I think it will surface that he's more of an edge in this system. He is nearly identical to guys like Carl Granderson or Tano Passignon for the Saints. Obviously, Nielsen's system coming in, they love big 280-pound lengthy guys for early down work. And I don't think that's going to be Miles Cole for them. As soon as they figure that out, I think they'll look at the depth chart and say, well, I guess it's Esezi. And I think he will climb up the depth chart and ultimately make this team. Whereas right now they might not be projecting that, but I like him as a run defender, watched a lot of him at Minnesota, and I think he's got the chops to be someone that can eat up 15 snaps for this D-line in a rotation. But obviously no one you're really all that excited about in the edge room. And then for the interior defensive line, we got to talk about Mason Smith. This is a fascinating pick. I thought it was a little early. I had him as more of a 3rd or a 4th round guy because he's another one of these just kind of crazy athletes that the production hasn't been there, or he's had some question marks in terms of health and kind of the lack of overall growth in his game as a freaky, 5-star prospect. Just didn't really live up to the hype. But one of those traits-based developmental prospects, I mean, the guy looks like Chris Jones. And when he wins on his swim move and with his foot speed at his size and his length, when he does win as a rusher, it looks like Chris Jones. It's just he does not do that consistently, and you have to teach him run defense from the ground up. He plays with bad pad level, just no technique or discipline against the run at all. And while that swim move we mentioned is nice, I would love to see him develop a bull rush because we draw the Chris Jones comparisons, and we're obviously a long way away from Mason Smith becoming Chris Jones, but Chris Jones is so effective with his other pass rush moves because the threat of the bull rush is there. With Mason Smith, it's actually very similar to Trayvon Walker, where you would think this guy's a great bull rusher, but he really struggles to pair that first step with his hands to generate power. And until he does that, I don't know how consistent of a rusher he's going to be. So I had him more of a 3rd round type of flyer on upside. They take him mid-2nd round. But, I'm certainly not going to write him off. And if you want to gamble a little bit earlier on the upside to make sure you get him when Armstead is 31 years old and You do seem like you've kind of struck out on Trayvon Walker, and you're looking for a legit number 2 other than Allen. I can't fully fault them for continuing to go after that, though he's got a long road ahead of him. Then you got some veteran types. Adam Gotsis has played his role, and I think will continue to play his early down role. Even if the scheme's different, he might play a little early down edge stuff as well. Jeremiah Ledbetter as well, I think is a decent backup, but was much more of a fit for the last scheme than this one. Same with Tyler Lacey, who they drafted last year. That's kind of the downside sometimes when you change these schemes, is some of these mid-round draft picks that fit the scheme well, guys like Tyler Lacey, Yasir Abdullah, or a backup like Jeremiah Ledbetter, don't really fit you anymore. And then you end up spending another draft pick on a guy you think you like in Jordan Jefferson. You thought we've been critical on some of their draft picks so far. I mean, my God, they took a 4th-round pick, wiped their ass with it, and then threw it in the trash. I could not believe he got drafted in the 4th round, let alone got drafted. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's a 5th-year player, who's never done anything at LSU, who had really bad tape, who was also fighting people at the Senior Bowl because he was clearly the worst player there, other than maybe Miles Cole, and was getting his ass kicked snap in, snap out. He ripped off Christian Haynes's helmet, started swinging around like a madman in front of all the players. Apparently, the Jags watched that and said, we like his intensity, but I saw nothing there. I would be stunned if he makes an impact for this team and would frankly bet against him being on the roster next year. And I know I sound as this like crazy hater, but they just make these picks on these players that I'm like, why are you just wasting the opportunity to get real talent in here? It's wild. But the end product is pretty good here. As we read off earlier, pretty damn close to a top 10 offensive line, 9th to 11th overall, 9th to 13th in pass rush, 5th to 13th for the run defense. And at the end of the day, this is going to be kind of the identity of this defense. Though the linebackers here, as a transition, are in part a big identity here. This is a group they've invested in, and it's a really good duo. Hell, they rank really high at linebacker because, well, they're good players, but also there's just not a lot of complete rooms at linebacker in the league right now. It's a very thin, shallow position across the league, and for what it's worth, the Jags are really good here. So they rank 4th for overall linebacker, 4th to 7th in coverage, 5th to 11th in run defense. So not necessarily like dominant in either phase, but the completeness of this group is enough to get them inside the top 5 for overall linebacker rooms for me. So you got Foye Oluokun, has been a really nice signing for this team. He's been a really fun evolution. He came into the league as like a 215-pound quasi-safety from Yale and has gradually beefed up and completed his game to the point that he's quite easily a top 10 linebacker in the NFL. And just complete. Maybe not the like longest or biggest guy for run defense, but he compensates for it by being really good in his keys. He's a great tackler, flies to the ball, wins pursuit angles, gets ahead of blocks a lot of times. So even if he, can get consumed by a guard coming downhill on him because he is only 230 pounds, a lot of times he's just there first and it doesn't matter. He's also really good in coverage, former safety. Those instincts show up. He, feels out the flow against play action. He gets a ton of depth, gets his hands on footballs, can man guys up. He's just a really, really complete linebacker. And then you have Devin Lloyd, a first-round pick 2 years ago, and he had a really good year last year. He is not the best athlete, and that shows. They have to kind of protect him a little bit by keeping him in short areas. The sideline-to-sideline speed against the run isn't anything special. He can take bad angles, which can lead to missed tackles, but also lead to him just not getting to the ball carrier in time. But other than that, he's a really heady player. He was my LB1 in that draft because you just don't find a lot of college linebackers that truly understand the position in the way that he has, and it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that he's come in and been such a productive all-around player. His length and his mind make him a good run defender, despite the deficiencies we said. And then in coverage, talk about headiness. He really feels the flow of zone. He baits the quarterback. He already has 12 pass breakups and 3 interceptions in 2 years. That's incredible ball production. Now, that lack of athleticism does show up in pass coverage. He gives up a lot of yards, and when they do ask a lot of him, he's basically either making a play or getting beat for 15 yards. So he's not the perfect coverage defender, but as a number 2 to Foye, totally fine with that. One of the better LB2s in the league. And then another benefit to switching to this Saints defense is it's going to open up much more of an opportunity to go to Chad Muma. And one of my big criticisms when they took Lloyd and Muma in the same draft after they just paid Foye Oluokun was obviously that's a lot to invest in linebacker in one offseason, but also like they weren't, I said, you're not even a 4-3 team, so you don't even have a path to get all these guys out there on base defense. Even if that's only 15, 20% of the time, they didn't even have a path to do that because their base defense was a 3-4. But now when they get into base, Chad Muma can do some of that stuff that the Saints do with LB3s. It's been Christian Ellis. Pete Werner did some of that early in his career. There will be a role now for Chad Muma within this defense, and that's a good thing. I mean, he is in year 3. He's got a lot of talent. He's had his flashes. He's had his downsides as well. In his rookie year, though, he actually overtook Devin Lloyd for a little bit after Lloyd was struggling. That didn't last long, but, I thought he was a talented linebacker, and in year 3, there's no reason to believe he can't at least be a really good third linebacker that can help this run defense and do some stuff kind of blitzing and a variety of stuff. So we should see a little bit more Chad Muma, and I'm kind of excited to see him. I liked him as a prospect. Makes a lot more sense now in this role. And then I also like Ventrell Miller. If you had an injury here, I think you have more of a path for him to get on the field. Really liked his tape. Aggressive, head-hunting linebacker, but smart. Reminds me a lot of Denzel Perriman, so there's your pro comp on him. Ty Summers more just a special teamer, but yeah, it's a really good linebacking group. Again, ranking 4th in the league, very balanced. In a league where teams are looking to exploit that linebacker position, you can't really do that against the Jags. And they're one of really few linebacking groups that I would say do elevate the defense. But then you have the secondary, and it's not the prettiest looking group. They get a C grade for me there, ranking 24th to 28th. And you just got questions galore here. Now, your number 1 corner is Tyson Campbell, who just got a big contract extension. He got kind of close to top of the market money, 4 years, $76 million, basically the same deal that Jalen Johnson got. He hasn't played at the level Jalen Johnson has. In fact, I don't think he's really proved that he can be a true number 1. I think year 2 of 3 for him, he was a number 1, and then the other 2 years, he has been a average number 2. So I was a little surprised they paid him. It seemed it was a little bit of a desperation signing, honestly, because you look at the rest of the secondary and they couldn't mess around with this. They needed to at least have one piece that they feel good about. But it is risky in the sense that if he can't get back to 2022 consistency, you overpaid for him. But even last year where he had some bad games, he had some moments where he was giving up too many yards, he still looked the part. I like Tyson Campbell. I think he's really good man-to-man. He's got good reaction time. He's got good enough speed, good enough length, good enough foot quickness. Kind of fell to the second round because he wasn't some spectacular athlete, but I definitely thought he was the better corner out of Georgia that year between him and Eric Stokes, and he got drafted after Stokes and as well outproduced him. Both guys have dealt with injuries, but the money was a little bit surprising, but good player. I don't think they're going to be too worried about it. I think he can certainly have a good year and kind of reestablish himself / establish himself as a legit 1, even if he isn't the most shut down, dominant type of guy. Where the questions really come, though, are after that. Their number 2 corner right now is Ronald Darby, who gets a small 2-year, $5 million contract. Not necessarily because of his play on the field last year. He actually played really well for Baltimore. But the fact that he's a 31-year-old corner that has basically never been able to stay healthy enough to be a starting corner. So week 1, I actually like having Ronald Darby as your number 2 corner. I think him and Tyson Campbell within a man-heavy system can work. And if they get lucky, Ronald Darby can stay healthy and they might exceed this ranking of 24th to 28th, but you cannot bet on that, especially when you're realistic about last year in Baltimore. I mean, that was his best year in 5 years on a defense that basically everybody exceeded expectations. So for the signing, for what it is in a vacuum a good signing. But when he is your only other corner, not named Tyson Campbell, that's just asking for trouble. And then their slot corner, so it's Darnell Savage, who's been a safety for the Packers. I'm actually really excited to see Darnell Savage as a slot corner. I can't rank him that high. He's never played this position, right? So we don't know what he's going to be. But as a Packers fan, watching Joe Barry attempt to put players in the best position to succeed, myself and many Packers fans were like, put Darnell in the slot. He has all the traits to do it. In the very small sample size that they would do that, he looked pretty good. But it is an entirely different deal to learn it in a man-heavy system, to prove that he can defend the run from the slot. There's a lot to prove there. And they gave him like decent money, 3 years, $21 million. It was an aggressive deal. And again, I can't rank him that high because he's been really inconsistent at best as a coverage player, to downright bad at times, to downright getting benched at times. Green Bay obviously had a huge need at safety and chose not to bring him back. And I think for good reason they didn't bring him back. But I kind of also don't entirely hate this and wouldn't be surprised if Darnell Savage had a bit of a career resurgence as a true slot corner. I've been kind of calling for this for a long time. So I'm admittedly kind of excited to see this. On a prayer, you might get Ronald Darby healthy. Tyson Campbell might have a really good season. Might go back to 2022 Campbell, and Darnell Savage happens to be a really good slot corner. And you're definitely in business here. But as far as ranking this group right now, and in a series, we rank these players and these position groups very close to their floor. It's just, like I said, it's on a prayer that those things happen. And it's especially problematic when I just don't like their cornerback depth. Monteric Brown has played for this team. He's been bad. Jerrion Jones, I think, was overdrafted in the 3rd round based on what I saw. He's kind of a slot outside corner tweener. Don't mind him as a dime back, but as a potential starter, did not see that on his tape. DeAndre Prince is a developmental tools-based corner out of the SEC. Gregory Jr.'s barely played here. Christian Braswell, those are like late day 3 picks for this team. And then they brought in a handful of like journeyman veteran as well. But the likelihood that you have to go to some of these guys is pretty damn high. And that's a problem. That's someone coming in off the bench that you can pick on, especially when there's a pretty good chance you're going to be able to pick on Darnell Savage too, because I like the idea of him, but he's got a long way to go in terms of anticipation and learning a new position. Now, things do get better in the secondary. I like Andre Sisco. I think he's got a lot of talent, and I really like him in this system. So have one guy at every level of the defense that I think is going to be elevated by this defense. Trayvon Walker, Chad Muma getting to play more, and now Andre Sisco. I mean, all of these Saints-inspired defenses have had that true free safety. It was Marcus Williams for a long time. In Atlanta, they went and got Jesse Bates for that defense, and he had a great year. Andre Sisco is going to get to patrol the middle of the field, be a headhunter, tap into his ball skills, do what he does well as a true free safety. Getting back, he's done a lot of that well in Jacksonville, but he's going to be able to focus on it and I think have a really good year. I think he could emerge as I'll just play it a little bit safe and say like a top 10 free, like true free safety. I don't think he's too short of that right now. So I'm expecting good things from Sisco. And then honestly, I like Antonio Johnson as the counterpunch here. And he, it seems, is going to get to play more like real safety for the first time in his career. So that's kind of the big question here with Johnson. At Texas A&M, they played him as a slot corner. Last year, they played him as a slot corner. This new system seems to look at him. He is stiff. He's not really a slot corner. That's just how teams have asked him to play so far. But I like him as a strong safety, especially if he can bulk up a little bit and improve his run defense. But another guy that we can't rank too high. We haven't seen much of him, but right now he's listed as a starter. He had 2 picks last year and played well. when they did put him out there. And I'm excited to see him as well. You also have really good safety depth. You have Andrew Wingard, who is very good, I guess, insurance policy or even a dime back. But they have some flexibility there, right? You got Savage. We'll see what they do. But if they get away from him as the slot corner and you want to go to Antonio Johnson doing that, or, Jerrion Jones emerges as the slot corner and Antonio Johnson's struggling, you can put Andrew Wingard in there at that second safety spot. He's a very high floor player. You know what you're getting, just nothing you're too excited about. I still like Daniel Thomas. The playing time opportunities haven't come for him, but he's a heavy hitter with some speed. They bring in Terrell Edmonds to compete as well. He's a fine enough strong safety. He's played a lot of snaps in the NFL. And I even like the Josh Proctor pickup out of Ohio State. Reminded me a little bit of like a Cam Curl or Jordan Fuller out of Ohio State. Smart player, just not the most physical tools. So it's a really deep safety room. Still a lot to prove there, but I'm not terribly worried about the safety room here. So overall, again, a very fascinating secondary. It's polarizing. There is a world where this is a top half secondary in the league. If Darby's healthy and Savage is good in the slot and Antonio Johnson is a good safety, Cisco's still got room to grow as well. I mean, yeah, the upside's there, but the downside kind of speaks for itself as well. So as we look at the defense overall, they come out as my 17th ranked defense. Obviously, with that secondary, we just talked about being kind of the eyesore here. Other than that, they're very, very solid. They come out 11th for run defense, 15th for pass defense. There's a lot for Ryan Nielsen to work with here. And I would even say their overall potential for the defense is to be something close to the top 10. But they do have a pretty long list of variables that need to go right for them if that's going to happen. But let's talk about the special teams before we tie a ribbon on all of this. So they come out 17th in special teams. This is pretty simple. They actually were a very highly ranking special teams unit last year. However, their kicker is gone, and they're replacing him with a 6th-round rookie in Cam Little, who, off of the rookie-adjusted grade that I use based on their PFF grade from college, coming into the year, they're 31st in the league at kicker. So that's going to drag down their special teams projection, but it pretty much exclusively depends on that. The coordinator's the same. They retained a good return man in Duvernay. Their punter is really good in Logan Cook. Their coverage unit was really good last year. Rookie kickers can be a complete crapshoot. So it really just comes down to that. And it makes sense why they end up as the 17th overall special teams. As you look at the team splits, this is a remarkably balanced team. 17th overall, 16th on offense, 17th on defense, 17th on special teams. Very much on that fringe of a playoff team that's just looking to, have a couple things go right and get some of that 2022 magic back as well. I do want to recap their overall strengths and weaknesses. So strengths for me, quarterback and general explosiveness on offense. They've got vertical threats. They have an explosive running back. They have an explosive quarterback, an explosive tight end. There's a lot of big play potential with this offense. And then defensively, their front seven between the pass rush and the linebackers is really nice, enough that I would say it's a strength of the defense. Weaknesses, run blocking paired with offensive run game coaching is a disaster area for this team. And then I just can't say the secondary is anything other than a weakness until we see a little bit more there. But with that, I do have Ronald Darby listed in the wild cards for this team. If Ronald Darby can manage to stay healthy somehow, which is extremely unlikely, that's like rolling a 20 on a 20-sided die. But if that happens, the secondary might not be that bad, and then the defense won't have that big weak spot at corner. Could go a long way for them. And then we mentioned the rookie kicker being a big wild card for the special teams. Pretty much single-handedly decides whether it's going to be a good special teams or not based on last year. And then a couple of key players as well at key positions. Trayvon Walker, a big third year for him, and Brian Thomas Jr. If he can step in as other LSU receivers have in recent years and be a dynamic number one wide receiver for this team, that changes the scope of what this offense has to work with. So those are your kind of 4 big pieces to keep an eye on in terms of what will determine the success of this team. But let's take a look at their schedule, their over-under, and what my kind of win total expectations are for the Jags. It certainly isn't the easiest schedule. They've got to play the AFC East and the NFC North. One nice thing is that one of those road games in the NFC North is kind of a home game for them in many ways, at least something they're comfortable with. They get Chicago week 6 in London. Beyond that, I mean, I don't have a ton to add. There's a lot of tough games on the schedule. This is more going to come down to their execution and their player development. They're going to have to weather a really challenging start to their season. They have at Miami, Cleveland, at Buffalo, and at Houston. That's not going to be easy. You could be looking at a 1-3 start that they're going to have to kind of dig out of and show some mental toughness. But, I think things do lighten up at the end of the year. A little bit, at least. You get Raiders on the schedule, Minnesota coming to town, your 2 games against Tennessee late. So maybe some light at the end of the tunnel on their schedule. Won't be taking any victory laps through the first half of the season on this team. We'll want to see how they get through the last 6 weeks there for sure. But yeah, it's not going to come easy. My kind of formula there had them at 8 wins with this schedule. I wouldn't bet on that. I am a Trevor Lawrence believer. I do like aspects of this team. Off the top of my mind, I definitely picture the Jags as more of a 9-win team. But I don't know that I'd bet on that either. Having to play the divisions that they have to play, and their own division is damn tough. So they are a tough team to know what to do with. I feel like coming in towards the middle. I've seen some people say, how are the Jags not revealed yet? I've seen some people thinking the Jags are going to last a little bit longer. So I think I'm kind of in the middle. In terms of Super Bowl odds, they're 18th, so kind of right on the line there as well. But I don't have any strong opinions on this team. I don't. I'm excited to watch them. I think we broke down what needs to go right, what could go wrong for this team pretty well throughout this video. But that is all we've got. Thank you so much for watching. It's been another great deep dive. Please hit that like button if you haven't yet. And let me know, is this ranking too high or too low? I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments. We'll see you in a couple days for yet another deep dive. But until then, peace out. We'll see you later.